All right, so you're here because you're really trying to get a handle on what's actually happening in the Bitcoin world right now.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
see all these headlines and all the chatter going on, and you want to just like boil it all down to what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're
Yeah.
diving deep into this conversation with Samson Mow that he did on the Simply Bitcoin channel.
I think that's a perfect place to start because, I mean, what really jumps out at you right away is this like contradiction.
Yeah.
We have all this news coming out that on the surface looks super bullish for Bitcoin, but the price isn't really reflecting that in this huge upward surge.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, and so our goal in this deep dive is to try to figure out why that is,
Right.
but also to really unpack what the IMF is doing and saying about Bitcoin, and specifically what it means for countries adopting it.
Yeah, it's really significant what they're doing.
So,
Absolutely. And just to be clear for everyone, we're pulling all of this information from that transcript of that interview with Samson Mow on the Simply Bitcoin YouTube channel.
yes.
Okay, so let's just get right into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Bitcoin's price.
Yeah,
Okay, it feels stuck.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mow even said, we're stagnant in the 80s range.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone who doesn't know,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the 80,000 US dollar range
Yeah.
for Bitcoin.
Yeah, $80,000 a Bitcoin.
And what's interesting is Mow himself feels like Bitcoin should be at 0.2 million.
Right.
So $200,000.
Yeah, and he mentioned that the CIO of Bitwise basically agrees with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of crazy because you have someone who runs a big Bitcoin company,
Right.
and then you have the CIO of an investment firm that actually has a Bitcoin product saying the same thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I mean, what I find fascinating is this idea of a fast reconciliation that Mo talks about. This feeling that, this gap between like what people think Bitcoin is worth and what it's actually trading at just can't last forever.
Yeah.
Like it has to resolve somehow. And, he even throws out these possibilities like $10,000 candles, maybe even a $100,000 candle.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, it really suggests like a ton of pent-up energy.
Right, like it's going to pop.
Yeah, exactly.
And he compares this to the 2017 cycle.
Yeah.
And he's saying another 10x increase is highly possible.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And he's basing all of this on just the fundamental principle of supply and demand.
Makes sense.
Like he says over and over again that the world still hasn't really grasped how scarce Bitcoin really is,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you compare it to how easily you can just create fiat currencies.
It's so true.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
He starts to lay out all these factors that could actually drive demand for Bitcoin higher.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what are some of these factors?
Well, he mentions Cynthia Lomas and her proposed Bitcoin Act, which aims to take 1 million Bitcoin off the market.
Okay. Wow.
And then there's talk about these Bitcoin bonds potentially scooping up another 2 million Bitcoin.
Wow.
And we already know MicroStrategy holds like 500,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we have to factor in all these Bitcoin ETFs that are just accumulating Bitcoin.
Right.
And then on top of that, we have GameStop just sitting there with $4.6 billion in cash.
Yeah. I could see them going into Bitcoin.
I mean, the scale of this potential demand, you have to wonder about the price being stuck where it is.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes you think.
And this is where that question comes up.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Where is all this Bitcoin being held?
Yeah, where is it all going?
Right. Mo even talks about how a lot of people are concerned that all this Bitcoin is just ending up at Coinbase.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically for companies like MicroStrategy and these new ETFs.
Yeah.
And that leads to the whole issue of rehypothecation.
Right. The idea that all these purchases that are being reported, they don't actually mean that Bitcoin is being taken out of circulation.
Exactly. And that could be why we're not seeing this huge price reaction.
That's a really good point.
And this whole discussion brings up this bigger point about how Bitcoin operates within the traditional financial system.
Yeah.
Mo, he's really adamant that the paper Bitcoin theory is wrong.
Yeah, he seems pretty sure about that.
He emphasizes that there's so much regulatory oversight, and he trusts people like Michael Saylor.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that these concerns even exist highlights this fundamental tension.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You have this asset, Bitcoin, that's built on the idea of verifiable scarcity
Right.
and self-custody.
Right, you hold your own keys.
Exactly. But then you have all these centralized entities holding massive amounts of it.
Yeah, that kind of contradicts the whole ethos of Bitcoin.
Right. And so what's Mo's counter-argument to the price stagnation then?
Well, he seems to think it's market manipulation of the price feed. He's suggesting that these big, sophisticated players like hedge funds and prop trading firms are basically coordinating these sell orders
Interesting.
to create downward pressure on the price, based on market sentiment.
Yeah.
And then the price recovers a little bit, and then they do it again.
So it's this constant manipulation going on.
Exactly, this back and forth.
I mean, if that's true, that's pretty frustrating.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like they're playing games with the market.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting, though, is Mao's point about the dwindling supply of Bitcoin.
Right.
And the whole mystery of who is actually selling.
Yeah. Who is it?
Right. And he mentions how the OGs, the early Bitcoin adopters that he knows,
Yeah.
they're not really cashing out in any significant way.
So that means it has to be coming from somewhere else.
Exactly. And this leads to this whole idea that despite the price being flat,
Yeah.
huge amounts of Bitcoin are being absorbed at this current level.
So they're buying it all up.
Yeah.
And what's the implication of that?
Well, I think the implication is that all this accumulation by these big players, it can't go on forever.
Yeah.
Like, eventually we're going to see this upward price correction.
So it's like a spring being compressed.
Yes, exactly. Like, at some point it has to release.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah, I think so, too.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the IMF.
Right.
Because this is where the conversation takes a really interesting turn.
Definitely.
Because they start talking about the IMF's stance on Bitcoin ownership.
Yeah.
And specifically in relation to El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as legal tender.
Right.
Mow points out that there's this message the IMF is sending to the 94 countries that work with them.
Yeah.
And it's not a good one for Bitcoin.
That doesn't sound like it.
No. And the fact that they're directly engaging with El Salvador,
Yeah.
which is a sovereign nation with a democratically elected president,
Hmm.
it really emphasizes how serious they are about this.
So basically they're saying you can't do that.
Yeah. And Mow thinks that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, can they really tell a country what to do?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Mo's a huge fan of President Bukele.
Makes sense.
And he even brings up the timing of that famous tweet, buying the dip.
Oh, yeah, I remember that tweet.
And then right after that, all this news starts coming out from the IMF.
Interesting.
So it seems like there might be some internal conflict within El Salvador
Oh, okay.
about their IMF loan agreement and their Bitcoin strategy.
Right, because they obviously need the loan from the IMF, but they also want to keep buying Bitcoin.
Exactly. And it's important to understand that El Salvador has this 119-page agreement with the IMF.
Oh, wow.
And at first, Mo was really concerned about El Salvador continuing to buy Bitcoin with this agreement in place.
Yeah, because it seemed like the IMF was telling them they couldn't.
Right, but it wasn't like a demand from the IMF.
Okay.
It was more like a negotiation.
Oh.
So there are these conditions that El Salvador had to meet.
Okay.
And then El Salvador continued to announce that they were buying more Bitcoin.
Oh, so they kept buying.
Yeah, and the IMF kept saying that El Salvador was still complying with the agreement.
Oh, that's confusing.
Yeah, it is. And Mo tries to explain it.
Okay, how does he explain it?
Well, he says maybe there are loopholes in the agreement.
Okay.
Maybe the agreement says they have to stop buying Bitcoin at a certain time, but that time hasn't come yet.
That would make sense.
And then there's another theory that Joe Nakamoto brought up.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, he thinks that El Salvador might be moving their Bitcoin to these private wallets.
Oh, so it's not showing up on the public ledger.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then they can kind of buy more without the IMF knowing.
Yeah, or at least it's harder to track.
Interesting.
Or maybe, this is less likely, but maybe they're getting huge donations from someone.
Yeah, that's possible.
I mean, we don't really know for sure.
Right.
But the point is that the IMF is very powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
And they take their role in global finance very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They want to control things.
So what does this mean for other countries that are thinking about adopting Bitcoin?
That's a great question. And Mo talks about this a lot.
I bet.
Because this is a huge part of his focus.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to see more countries using Bitcoin.
Right.
But he knows the IMF is a big obstacle.
Yeah, for sure.
So his strategy is to advise countries to use Bitcoin as leverage.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So even if a country needs money from the IMF,
Mm-hmm.
they can still adopt Bitcoin-friendly policies
Okay.
and then use that as a bargaining chip when they're negotiating with the IMF.
So it's like they have something to trade.
Exactly.
That's pretty smart.
And Mo even suggests that just trying to undo Bitcoin-related policies could take the IMF years.
Wow.
So that gives the country a lot of time to get what they want.
So basically, Bitcoin becomes this geopolitical tool.
Exactly.
I like it.
So why is the IMF so worried about El Salvador adopting Bitcoin?
Right. It seems like a pretty small country.
Well, Mo has a couple of ideas about
Yeah.
that. First, he says that Bitcoin is a threat to the IMF itself.
Oh, Oh, how so?
Well, the IMF is built on the idea of fiat currency,
Right.
and Bitcoin challenges that.
Yeah, because you can't just print more Bitcoin.
Right, it's a fixed supply.
So the IMF can't control it.
Exactly.
And then they lose their power.
Yeah, and then the second reason is that El Salvador is in a lot of debt,
Oh, yeah.
and they need these loans from the IMF.
Right.
So the IMF is worried that if El Salvador keeps buying Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
they might not be able to pay back their loans.
Because Bitcoin is so volatile.
Right. And they're also not a big Bitcoin mining country.
So they don't have that extra income from mining?
Yeah, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
They want to use Bitcoin.
But they also need the IMF.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about the long-term vision for Bitcoin?
Well, this is where the conversation gets really exciting
Yeah,
because Mo is so optimistic.
I love that.
He's not worried about the day-to-day price fluctuations.
Yeah, he's looking at the bigger picture.
Right. And he's really focused on real adoption.
The wheel of adoption.
Yeah, like people actually using Bitcoin in their everyday lives.
I mean, that makes sense.
And he points to the U.S. and other countries
Yeah.
as examples of where this is already happening.
Oh, yeah.
Like he talks about Bhutan.
Bhutan.
They're using their Bitcoin mining profits to build an airport.
That's amazing.
I know, isn't that cool?
That's so cool.
And Mo thinks that when people see this happening,
Yeah.
when they see that Bitcoin can be used to build real things,
Yeah.
it's going to change everything.
It makes it so much more tangible.
Right. It's not just some abstract digital thing anymore.
Yeah, I totally get it.
And Mo's vision goes even further than that.
Okay.
He wants to see Bitcoin used to give everyone access to the financial system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He wants to see people using Bitcoin to start businesses and to trade internationally.
So it's about empowering people.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
And his whole philosophy boils down to this.
Okay.
Fix the money, fix the world.
That's powerful.
It really is.
And it really highlights the potential that he sees in Bitcoin.
Yeah. He's not just looking at the price.
He's looking at the impact it can have on the world.
Right. So just to wrap things up,
Yeah.
we've covered a lot of ground today,
Definitely.
but I think you have a much clearer understanding of what's going on with Bitcoin.
I think so too.
The price might seem stagnant right now,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of positive things happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And the IMF is a big obstacle,
Yeah.
but Bitcoiners like Samson Mow are finding ways to work around them.
And in the long run,
Yeah,
Bitcoin is going to change the world.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of time.
And that's why it's so important to keep our eyes on the bigger picture.
Right. We can't get caught up in the short-term noise.
We have to focus on the long-term potential of Bitcoin.
Yeah. And so as you go about your day,
Yeah.
I wanted to think about this.
Yeah.
If the IMF is so powerful,
Mm-hmm.
how can smaller countries use Bitcoin to their advantage?
That's a great question.
It's something to really think about
Yeah, it is.
because Bitcoin has the potential to level the playing field
Absolutely.
and give everyone a chance to succeed.
And that's something worth fighting for.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for this conversation.
Absolutely. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, this was fun.
And to everyone listening,
Yeah.
keep learning,
Okay.
keep exploring, and keep stacking sats.
That's the best advice.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.
See you then. Bye.